Hey, how's it going, everyone? So today I wanted to do a reaction video on Robert F. Kennedy's keynote at Bitcoin 2023. Just kind of go through what he was saying in his speech, give my own two thoughts on it, and see what this presidential candidate has to offer. So far, everything that I've been hearing from Robert Kennedy, I've pretty much agreed with. Some of the things, not so much. I'm a big proponent of nuclear energy, and he does have some valid reasons why he's against it, um, including the insurance companies won't insure it. So that kind of leaves us, the people, as essentially the ipso facto insurers of nuclear energy if anything was to go wrong. I don't think he gets into that topic on here. He focuses more on Bitcoin in this one. But yeah, let's just hop into it, see what he has to say, give our own two thoughts on it, and see what he's about.
Hello, Bitcoiners. Well, there's a lot of people who are not in this room for whom Bitcoin may seem an issue that's too trivial for a presidential campaign. David Bailey at a party that we were at last night asked me how I got sold on Bitcoin. And I told him that it happened to be in an instant when I saw what happened at the trucker strike in Ottawa. And a few months before that, I'd gone to Italy, and I'd given a public speech to a large crowd in Italy about the dangers of digital currency, and particularly programmable currency that could be used by governments to enforce, to punish bad behavior in combination with surveillance systems and facial recognition systems that the government would know when you were doing something wrong and could change your credit card. And this is what's happening in China, so they would only purchase groceries within maybe a 5-minute walk of your home. And I said that hypothetically, and I think 6 weeks after I made that speech, I saw that very thing happen to the truckers in Ottawa. As most of you know, that trucker strike was a peaceful demonstration of people who were demanding rights that are sacred and are taken for granted for every American.
Yeah, that's true. I thought it was such an overstep by the Canadian government to um, essentially seize people's money that they were giving to these truckers. And I think one of the justifications that they were using is like, oh, you're supporting like a terrorist organization, which is completely ridiculous. That's like saying if you walked on Occupy Wall Street and gave someone, $5 to get a coffee, that they're now like a terrorist, and the government's going to come in and take that money. Completely ridiculous, a complete overstep by the Canadian government and Trudeau. Like, is ridiculous. That's one of the reasons that I really started getting heavily into Bitcoin. I was like, okay, if the government can just come in and take your money, what stops them from coming in and taking any of your property? Like, what stops the ATF from coming in and taking, all your guns under the guise of, oh, we think you're harboring or you might be a terrorist? What do you mean might be? I thought we had innocent until proven guilty, and now you're just going to come in and take something of mine because you think I might do something? When did thoughts become a crime?
The right to be free of government mandates, the right for free assembly, the right for free speech, the right to petition our government, all those things that we take for granted. And nonetheless, and it was a peaceful demonstration, nonetheless, the Canadian government fiercely repressed the truckers' protest. Government officials declared a state of emergency. They suppressed free speech. Perhaps most alarmingly, they froze the bank accounts of hundreds of protesters and their supporters, which they identified using surveillance and data monitoring technologies. Some of these lawful and peaceful protesters, none of these lawful and peaceful protesters had violated any law. They had not been charged, and they certainly had not been convicted. But suddenly they found that they could not access their money, their bank accounts, to pay their mortgages or to feed their families. When I witnessed this cataclysm, this devastating use of government repression, I realized for the first time how free money is as important to freedom as free expression. And a government that has the power to starve its citizens when they're disobedient will inevitably turn our entire country into serfs.
Yeah, he makes a good point. Like, at least from my perspective, money just isn't like this thing that we use to buy Starbucks or buy a house. Money is representative of, our time and the value of our time, more importantly. So when the government can come in and take your time away through the value of your currency, they can just go ahead and take that away. They're infringing on your right or yeah, they're infringing on your right to express yourself. Because how do you express yourself? What's the main thing that everyone uses to express themselves? Time. So if they can take your time away through the intermediary of a monetary exchange, then what's the point? Why work for the value that you're putting into the world if someone can just come in and take it away at any point? I don't see why anyone would want to work or be a part of that system. And it's no wonder kids today are so about socialism, because I think they see that long-term effect. Why put in the work if all of this can just be taken away and it's all just like a Ponzi scheme, essentially? But
it is the ambition of every totalitarian regime to exercise complete control over every aspect of our lives. We live at a time now that technology has dangerously expanded the capacity for governments and corporations to control our lives. Distant, impersonal multinationals and authoritarian technologies have usurped the realms of human activity that were once private or held by community. They monitor our every movement, our communications, our every transaction, and the technologies they use to monitor us can also be used to control us. Led by the United States, liberal democracies across the globe suddenly pivoted during the pandemic and used that crisis as an excuse to trample essential constitutional rights and freedoms. Governments suspended the rights to free assembly, the freedom of worship, property rights, trial by jury, and they censored free speech in the name of combating misinformation and disinformation. We lost our freedom to travel. The mandates cost us even sovereignty over our own bodies. Some might say, well, those were just temporary restrictions and temporary suspensions of our rights. But the Constitution has no pandemic exception. And
that's a really good point. Like, sure, the government can say that, these are just temporary restrictions, but like you said, the Constitution doesn't have anything for, I'm going to temporarily remove your rights for the betterment of your whole community. That doesn't exist. That shouldn't be a thing, because if the government can temporarily take away your rights, that eventually is going to lead to fully taking away your rights. Once you draw a line in the sand and the government steps over that line, they're going to keep stepping over that line over and over again. It might not be in this particular context, but now that there's a legal precedent set forth, they can go ahead, take that legal precedent and insert it into any aspect that they deem fit. And it's just crazy.
And by the way, the framers of the Constitution knew all about pandemics. There was a malaria epidemic that decimated the armies of Virginia during the Revolutionary War, and a smallpox epidemic that froze the armies of New England at the very time when Benedict Arnold had led the capture of the city of Montreal. And because smallpox had decimated that force, we were not able to hold Montreal. Otherwise, Canada today would be part of the United States. And the framers knew that at the time. Not only that, but between the end of the Revolutionary War and the ratification 9 years later of the Bill of Rights, there were epidemics in almost every city in our country. Smallpox epidemics, cholera epidemics, yellow fever epidemics that killed tens of thousands of people. And yet, the framers did not put an epidemic exception in the Constitution. They wrote the Constitution not for easy times, but for hard times. And during the Civil War, when we lost 659,000 troops killed in battle on both sides, it's the equivalent of 7.2 million today, a much worse loss than happened in COVID, and our country was being torn apart and came this close to being ripped apart. And when Abraham Lincoln did the right thing and tried to suspend habeas corpus to prevent Confederate infiltrators from inciting riots in the northern cities, he was told by the Supreme Court, you can't do it. It's in the Constitution. It doesn't matter how bad the crisis is. You cannot suspend the Constitution. And yet, we saw this very, very dangerous precedent that we now have, that we as American citizens are now facing in our country, that happened during COVID, where the government established a new precedent, which is that if it has a good enough excuse, the government can now take away all of our freedoms. And guess what? There is always a good excuse, whether it's to stop a new disease, the next pandemic, to protect us from misinformation, to prevent domestic terrorism, to stop hate speech, to prosecute a war, or to fight climate change. But all of these reasons can easily turn into pretexts. Control of the public starts perhaps as a means, but it always becomes an end. It's part of the unstated and seductive ideology of totalitarianism that utopia will come through exercising perfect control over society. And that works well as long as the good guys are in control, or your guys are in control. Bitcoin is a bulwark against precisely this kind of government and corporate expansion and intrusion. In fact, it has been used to bypass oppressive government controls of the monetary systems, as in Canada and Weimar. As president, I will make sure that your right to hold and use Bitcoin is inviolable. First, I will defend the right of self-custody of Bitcoin and other digital assets. You should be able to own your own private keys the same as you own the keys to your car or own your wallet.
Well, I think we don't really have a problem with, like, right now structurally, of like being able to own your keys, right, or own your own wallet. It's more about the surveillance of that particular wallet. that is actually the real problem. Like if I go and pay for something, I don't want the government, back tracing every single payment that I've done through um, Bitcoin or even just my cash exchange, because eventually what's going to happen, government isn't impermeable, right? Leaks happen all the time, data is stolen. So what happens when, let's say in the future, we're all using Bitcoin to do our day-to-day transactions. That information gets leaked through the government because, the FBI, CIA, they're all, they all have access and being able to view your particular buying habits. So what happens when those buying habits fall into the large language models and the AI around marketing? Now you're going to get even more direct marketing, straight to the base of your spinal cord, that's going to talk to you essentially on the deepest level, because they know your exact buying patterns. They have you essentially all mapped out. And I think that's where we actually need the protections, not necessarily, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there is some laws trying to get into effect where, you're not owning your keys in your wallet. But I just don't see that happening. And I'm more concerned about the surveillance on those wallets. Like we already see the FBI and CIA, backtracking these people who actually stole Bitcoin. And yes, I think that's good, but that's in a case where a crime actually happened. And the cases I'm talking about is more, there isn't a crime that's being committed. They're just surveilling you because, they want to keep an eye on your citizens, kind of like the CCP does. And that's what I'm more concerned about, not really what he's talking about here, of people not being able to, own their keys. I don't think that's a problem. I think that's more of a problem inside of the Bitcoin community, where people, are just using these centralized exchanges to hold their Bitcoin and not having their own wallet. And that's more of a personal choice than like a systematic way of preventing people from owning their
Your wallet, whether
keys
it's in your pocket or in your computer, is your own. I don't think the government has the right to demand access to your Bitcoin key or indeed any of your passwords. To say otherwise is to cede essential territory to the surveillance state. Second, I will uphold the right to run a node at home. KYC requirements should be applied at the level of banks and exchanges, not at the level of nodes. Otherwise, it would become impossible to run the software. The whole point of Bitcoin is that it's decentralized. Anyone can run a node, and it's important not only for Bitcoin, but for democracy to be decentralized. Third, I will defend use-neutral, industry-neutral regulation of energy. President Biden's 30% tax on energy for Bitcoin miners requires an invasive surveillance apparatus to monitor what is happening in individual computers. It sets a terrible precedent in which everything that you do that requires electricity must now be monitored by the government. That's why I also support people's rights to refuse smart meters in their homes. Fourth, I will make sure that the United States remains the global hub of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Major established companies like PayPal, Fidelity, and Block are investing heavily in Bitcoin-related software development. Some of the best engineers and coders in the tech industry work in this field, and we want to keep them here in America. I will reverse the government's growing hostility toward this industry and keep innovation at home. That leads to my fifth point. Events like the FTX calamity prove that some kind of regulation of the crypto industry is needed. My administration will consult with knowledgeable people like yourselves to establish sensible jurisdiction and governance. For starters, we must recognize that Bitcoin is not a security and should not be regulated as such. Bitcoin is in a class by itself. Its wide decentralization, I'm told now that there are 40,000 nodes, prevents a lot of the insider trading, manipulation, and pump and dump schemes that plague other cryptocurrencies. Six,
The only problem I see with his fifth point there is he essentially just said, "Hey, I'm looking for a Bitcoin lobby. I'm looking for a lobby that is pro Bitcoin. That he's a politician, right? He thinks he is saying, he might be saying for the benefit of Bitcoiners, but he's also looking for money. What are these big super PACs doing? They're lobbyists for their causes, and when you have lobbies, any lobby, there's always gonna corruption is always going to rear its ugly head. So while I agree it's smart that we have knowledgeable people in the cryptocurrency, or explicitly the Bitcoin industry, advising our leaders on Bitcoin and the things that they should do, I think we have to recognize that that's also going to bring about some negatives, whether that's 2, 10, 20 years down the line. We're going to see some negative headlines. Bitcoin lobbyists lobby this person for this thing that is negatively going to affect, this other input. And that's just something that, there's intrinsic risk when you start having lobbyists lobby for their particular point of view. And as Bitcoiners, I think we just have to, understand that that's a risk and not get ahead of ourselves, and go full in. Yes, this guy's pro Bitcoin, 100%. We also have to turn around and look at the industry leaders and say, okay, who are these industry leaders? What's the cost benefit analysis that they're playing out to give money to a particular politician? And is that actually, going to be good for me as the individual? And that's something I don't think that we really do. But nonetheless, I think it's a good idea to, have some sort of lobby informing politicians on these topics, because politicians, they get hundreds of you should do this, you should do that. They can't be subject matter experts in every single thing. That's not their job. They're politicians because they're essentially good managers. They're good at understanding a complex topic and then putting that complex topic into law. That's really, at least the legislative part of a politician.
Will carefully consider whether individuals like Ross Ulbricht were prosecuted.
I don't know anything about Ross Ulbricht, to be honest.
For actual crimes or as a means to crack down on crypto. If they've been unjustly made an example, I will consider pardoning them, and I will act very quickly to do so.
Yeah, obviously, that shouldn't be a controversial statement. If you committed a crime, yes, prosecute. If you didn't, why were you actually prosecuted? Was it just to make a point? CIA, Hunter Biden laptop. We don't got to get into that, but,
Before I conclude, I'd like to say something about the environmental criticism in Bitcoin. It may be unpopular to say here, but even though those criticisms are exaggerated, they have some degree of validity. It's exaggerated because Bitcoin miners chase the cheapest energy. They have to do that for economic reasons. And Bitcoin mining tends to go where the energy is the least expensive, drawing a lot of idle baseload as well as excess peak generation of renewable power. But I think Bitcoin miners can still do a lot better, and I encourage you in this industry to expand your use of pro-environmental energy techniques, such as capturing waste methane and using waste heat, which I know many of you are experimenting with. We environmentalists will continue to pressure you to improve. However, whether or not the criticism is valid, I want to make one thing plain. The environmental argument should not be used as a smokescreen for an agenda of suppressing Bitcoin. And let me repeat.
That's true. Like Bitcoin, if you have excess energy, if I'm running, a mining operation in Kenya and I'm losing some energy, I should be able to recoup that energy in some way. In Bitcoin mining, it's exactly how you recoup that energy. Why are you going to let something go to waste when it could be used, right? We're trying not to be wasteful today. That's why, you recycle plastic straws and you get an electric vehicle, because you're not trying to be as wasteful. So the whole, I had this conversation in one of my classes at UCR. This girl's like, oh, the environmental impact is really huge. It's like, yes, it is, but would you rather that energy go to waste? What's more wasteful, actually using something or not using something? I'd rather use something and have a value add than a value neg. We're not out here trying to neg.
That energy use should not be used as a pretext for an agenda of suppressing Bitcoin. Totalitarians hate anything that they can't control, and they will use any pretext necessary to control it. I am aware of an eerie parable to the COVID years when public health became a pretext to obliterate our basic rights and freedoms. The COVID public health emergency is gone now, and we must not now replace it with some new set of rationales to further the decades-long erosion of our freedoms. Finally, I'd like to clarify a couple of things. I'm not an investor, and I'm not here to give investment advice or to promote Bitcoin over other cryptocurrencies or other currencies. That's the job of the free market, not the President of the United States. My interest.
Good. That's what we need. Our president shouldn't be, advocating on behalf of, these lobbies. They should be trying to make informed decisions on particular industries and not being like, you need to go out and do X, Y, or Z. It's not their job. It's not their job to tell us exactly what to do. It's our job to tell them what to do.
My interest is one, I am an ardent defender and a lifelong defender of civil liberties. And Bitcoin is both an exercise and a guarantee of those freedoms. 2, Bitcoin is a major generator of the kind of innovation our country now needs. 3, Bitcoin embodies 2 of my highest ideals, transparency and trust. Americans have come to distrust the government, including the way that it has manipulated our money supply to benefit the very rich and to prosecute endless wars. Bitcoin is a neutral currency, beyond the ability of government or indeed any authority to manipulate. In our current system, nearly all of our transactions are transparent, all right? They're transparent to government and corporations, but their machinations and activities are not transparent to us, they are opaque. The public ledger of Bitcoin makes every transaction transparent to everyone. It might therefore be a harbinger of a future in which the government is transparent to the people, and that would be democracy. Now,
he makes a really good point right here. Like, there's a lot of talk about government waste, whether that's in the military context or, just your local government wasting resources. What if we forced the government, or the government's already doing it with their own CBDC? The CBDC for the US, I think, is actually going to be a positive in the context of we're now going to be able to see the transparency of where our tax dollars are actually going. Maybe not in the military black ops sense that's all blacked out, but like your local government. What if every tax dollar that went to your state, you and me were able to go in and see, tax dollar went in here, portion of it went here, another portion of it went here, majority of it went here to this program. I think that's a freaking fantastic thing and something that we need, like he said, for transparency and trust. Institutional trust is way, way down. So what if we can, one, have the citizens be able to trust the government, even, 1% more trust in the government is a good thing, not just for the government, but for us as citizens. And I think that's what we need, especially if we want, our society as it is, the positives of our society to continue in the future. Sure, problems are going to come up, but we need that trust. We need that transparency between the government and the individuals that make up the government.
I'm proud to make an historic announcement, but first, if you could please pull out your cell phones, our campaign will be the first presidential campaign in history to accept Bitcoin donations through the Lightning Network. And today we move one step closer to the future. Today we show the world the power and the durability and the flexibility of Bitcoin. I want to conclude by saying this. Almost everyone in this room is aware of the link between Bitcoin and democracy and freedom. And that's why almost everybody that I meet who is involved in Bitcoin is passionate about it. They're not passionate because it's an interesting currency. They're passionate because of the deep representation of a deep need that we have for liberty and democracy and the promise that this innovation has to guarantee those virtues. And we are now living in this age of turnkey totalitarianism with this emerging technology which can empower totalitarian regimes. And our job is to try to build and fortify democratic institutions at the same rate as that totalitarian instruments are being expanded in their power. Things like AI, which really are going to threaten democracy in its base. We need to not be chipping away at our democratic institutions. We need to be fortifying the ones that exist and building new ones. And the biggest, most important one on the horizon is Bitcoin, because it can't be manipulated. All of you, I know, are here, again, not because you love a currency, but because you love our country, you love democracy, you love freedom. And in that sense, your support of Bitcoin puts you in the same category as the framers of the Constitution that gave us that Bill of Rights, that created these democratic institutions. And you are the current manifestation of that impulse. So thank you all very much for everything that you do.
Yeah, so another company that I really like, Palantir, is doing exactly, what he's saying. Having, the framework to trust our institutions and make sure, the data that we're giving them isn't being used in nefarious ways, and having safeguards around how data is being used, right? And Bitcoin is kind of doing that, but more in like the traceable, like how can we trace back, all of the government spending and everything to make sure that, it's not being used for nefarious ways, and to hold democratic values to the same light. And I think Palantir and Bitcoin are almost in that same, they're in that same light. They're both trying to uphold those sort of democratic values that we care so much about. Yeah, so that was the end of his speech. Honestly, I really enjoyed it. I like the fact that he did recognize that there's improvements to be made on the environmental front, which improvements is just making the heat loss transfer of energy, actually being able to capture that energy and turn it into something valuable for whether that's industry leaders or individuals with solar panels on their roof, just trying to get a little bit more value add back into their economy. But so far, everything that I've heard from Robert F. Kennedy, I watched his. Maybe I should do a reaction video to the Breaking Points interview that he did, because so far I'm really liking everything he has to say. I, in the past, since Robert F. Kennedy has announced, I feel like I've seen more of Robert F. Kennedy and his agenda than I've seen of what Joe Biden and Donald Trump are like actually trying to do and put forward. And I might be a little bit biased towards Robert F. Kennedy because I like the fact that I'm not going to say what I was going to say with his uncle, but you can probably guess. Um, but yeah, I think I would vote for him. I got to learn a little bit more about some of the other policy issues he has. But overall, I think it was a great speech. It was only almost a 20-minute speech. And yeah, thanks for watching, and hopefully I will see you guys in the next video. Leave a comment down below. What do you guys think of Robert F. Kennedy? What do you guys think of Bitcoin? Who do you think is going to win the next presidential election? I have no idea. The polls have no idea. But I guess we'll see when the time comes. And you guys think Bitcoin's going to reach 100,000 by the end of the year? I don't really think so. Nonetheless, I'm dollar cost averaging in. I'm the real John Sarge. It's been real, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.